Here is the paragraph version without skipping any words. Mickey Mouse is black, he looked, and he said no, Mickey Mouse is colorblind, and the same goes for Tom and I. We've never thought of ourselves as being a black or white group. It's been three people in 1990. Tony Orlando was at the top, a star on the Walk of Fame awards in Vegas and millions in the bank, but now the truth about what almost destroyed him is finally coming out, from $35 million lawsuit to standing on a hotel ledge, ready to jump. This is the dark story he never wanted told, and the most shocking part, the phone call that saved his life came from the last person anyone expected. Tony Orlando's story starts in the heart of New York City, where he was born on April 3, 1944. His real name was Michael Anthony Orlando Cavadas. He grew up in Hell's Kitchen, a neighborhood known for its rough streets and working-class struggles. His father was Greek, his mother Puerto Rican, and their home was filled with culture, but life was not easy. Money was always tight, and the streets were filled with gang activity. Every day was a lesson in survival. Through it all, Orlando had one responsibility that shaped him more than anything else: caring for his sister Rhonda, who had cerebral palsy. While many kids around him got caught up in trouble, he stayed focused on his family at home. He was a caregiver. Outside, he was surrounded by music. Doo-wop groups practiced in stairwells, and Latin rhythms mixed with American rock and roll. He listened to everything. By 15, he had started his own group, the Five Gents. He didn't know where music would take him, but he knew he wanted to be a part of it. At 16, everything changed. Don Kirshner, one of the biggest names in the music industry, heard Orlando sing and saw something in him. He gave him work singing demo tracks for other artists. It wasn't glamorous, but it put him in the center of the action. He had a smooth voice and a natural charm which quickly caught the attention of record labels. In 1961, he got his big break with two hit songs, Halfway to Paradise and Bless You. Both tracks made it onto the charts, but Bless You was the real success, reaching number 15 in the US and climbing all the way to number 5 in the UK. With his music playing on the radio and his name growing in the industry, Orlando became a rising teen idol. He appeared on American Bandstand, the most popular music show of its time, where young fans fell in love with his voice and boyish looks. Soon he was touring the UK, alongside established acts like Bobby Vee and Clarence Frogman Henry. Performing for packed crowds, everything seemed to be going in the right direction, but just as quickly as his career took off, it started to fade. By 1963, the British invasion was changing the sound of popular music. Bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were bringing something fresh and exciting, and the soft pop ballads Orlando was known for were suddenly out of style. His last charting single, Happy Times Are Here to Stay, barely made an impact. Peaking at number 82, his music stopped selling. And by the time he turned 19, he had already stepped away from performing. It was a tough reality to face. He later said he felt like the youngest oldie but goodie that ever lived. His moment in the spotlight had come and gone, and he had no choice but to figure out a new path. He had married young and needed to support his family, so he turned to the business side of music. Instead of chasing a fading career, he made a move that most artists wouldn't even consider. He took a job at CBS Records, working behind the scenes. In 1970, Tony Orlando had everything he could want in the music industry except a desire to be a singer. At 26, he was a powerful executive at CBS Music, running the April Blackwood division. He worked with top songwriters like James Taylor and Laura Nyro, and even helped launch Barry Manilow's career. His job paid $200,000 a year, which would be over $1.4 million today. Singing had been part of his past, but he had no interest in going back. Then came a phone call that changed everything. His friends Hank Medress and Dave Appel, both producers, had a song called Candida, but they couldn't find the right singer. They asked Orlando to record it. He refused. At first his career was in business now, but they kept pushing, and he finally agreed on one condition: his name couldn't be attached to the song. It had to be released under a fake group name. They called it Dawn. No one expected much, but when Candida hit the airwaves in July 1970, it exploded. It climbed to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and sold over 1 million copies. Suddenly Tony Orlando was the voice of a huge hit song, but there was a problem. He still had his high-paying job at CBS, and if anyone found out he was moonlighting as a singer, it could ruin everything. Then came an even bigger shock. Bell Records, the label that released Candida, wanted a follow-up. One hit wasn't enough. They needed another song, an album, a real act to promote. Orlando was torn. His executive job was stable, and he had worked hard to get there, but the success of Candida was impossible to ignore. Still keeping his identity a secret, he recorded Knock 3 times. It was released in late 1970, and within weeks it became even bigger than Candida. By January 1971, the song had reached number 1 on the Billboard charts. There was no turning back now. By this point, Orlando had a choice to make: stay in his high-paying executive job or step into the spotlight for real. He chose music and left his job at CBS. Tony Orlando realized he had something special, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed a real group, not just a name on a record. That's when he called Thelma Hopkins and Joyce Vincent Wilson. Both were talented backup singers who had worked with major artists. They had strong voices, but more importantly, they had energy, chemistry, and the kind of presence that could light up a stage. The three of them became Tony Orlando and Dawn. Their first big test came when they toured Europe. Crowds loved them. It was clear this wasn't Just a studio act, they had something real, but their biggest moment was still ahead in 1973. They released Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree. No one could have predicted how big it would become. The song wasn't just popular, it was everywhere. People connected with its story about hope's second chances, and coming home. It went #1 in 8 countries and stayed at the top of the US and UK charts for 4 weeks. In just 3 weeks it sold 3 million copies in the US alone. Years later, Billboard ranked it one of the biggest songs of all time. Most artists would have been happy with one massive hit, but Tony Orlando and Dawn kept going. They followed up with songs like Say Has Anybody Seen My Sweet Gypsy Rose and He Don't Love You Like I Love You. Between 1970 and 1975, they had 19 hit singles, including 3 #1 songs. Their mix of pop, soul, and rock appealed to just about everyone. Then in 1974, something unexpected happened. CBS offered them a TV variety show. This was a huge deal at the time. Variety shows were one of the biggest forms of entertainment. The Tony Orlando and Dawn show started as a summer replacement for the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour. No one knew if it would last, but it quickly became a hit. The timing was perfect. America was dealing with the fallout of Watergate, and people wanted something lighthearted and fun. Tony Orlando, with his easygoing charm and trademark smile, became the perfect host. He even signed autographs with a smiley face inside the O of his name. The show featured music, comedy sketches, and celebrity guests like Jackie Gleason and Jerry Lewis. It ran for 3 seasons and made Tony Orlando and Dawn even bigger stars. But by 1976, things started to change. The group's momentum slowed, and Orlando was dealing with personal struggles. In 1977, he decided to step away from the spotlight. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the right one. Even though their time at the top was short, their impact was huge. Tie a Yellow Ribbon became more than just a song. It turned into a symbol of support for soldiers and those waiting for loved ones to return home. Their TV show became a classic piece of 1970s pop culture, and decades later their music is still remembered, proving that sometimes the most unexpected stars leave the biggest mark. At the height of his fame in the mid-1970s, Tony Orlando had everything: hit songs, a successful TV show, and millions of fans. But behind the scenes, he was struggling. The pressure to keep up with the fast-paced world of entertainment was overwhelming. Wanting to fit in, he started using cocaine. At first, it was just a way to loosen up, but it quickly became something more. For 9 months, from late 1976 to early 1977, he was addicted. Cocaine changed everything. It clouded his judgment, wrecked his confidence, and damaged his personal life. His marriage was falling apart, his performances were suffering, and his once clear vision for his career was slipping away. Here's the paragraph version of your text. Performing to packed audiences night after night, his shows were more than just concerts. They were full-scale productions with costume changes, elaborate sets, and even magic tricks. He blended his classic hits with new material, keeping his performances fresh and exciting. At the same time, Orlando took on a new challenge, hosting the New York City portions of the MDA Labor Day Telethon. He first joined in 1980, and what started as a one-time appearance turned into a commitment that lasted over 30 years. Millions of viewers tuned in each year, watching him help raise money for muscular dystrophy research. He only stepped away in 2011, leaving in protest after Jerry Lewis was unexpectedly removed from the Muscular Dystrophy Association. But Orlando's career wasn't just about music and television. In 1981, he took a bold step onto Broadway, starring in Barnum. The role of P.T. Barnum was unlike anything he had done before. He wasn't just singing, he had to learn tightrope walking, magic tricks, and circus stunts, all while performing on stage. Originally brought in as a temporary replacement, Orlando played the role for 3 weeks in May. Audiences loved him, and his success in Barnum led to more opportunities in theater. Years later, in 1995, he returned to Broadway in Smokey Joe's Cafe, a musical celebrating the hits of Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller. The show featured classic rock and roll songs from the 1950s and 60s, a perfect fit for Orlando's voice. The production ran for nearly 5 years, proving that his appeal stretched across generations. Beyond the stage, Orlando found a new purpose: supporting U.S. veterans. His 1973 hit Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree had already made him a symbol of hope for returning soldiers, but over time, he turned that connection into real action. He performed at countless USO shows, traveling to military bases and even active war zones to entertain troops. In 1993, he flew to Somalia to boost morale for soldiers stationed there during Operation Restore Hope. His advocacy didn't stop at performances. He worked closely with veterans organizations, using his fame to raise money and awareness. In 2002, he joined the board of directors for the Eisenhower Foundation, helping fund programs for former service members. Perhaps his most lasting contribution was his work with the National Veterans Foundation. As a spokesperson for more than a decade, he helped raise millions of dollars to support veterans and their families. Tony Orlando and Wayne Newton were once friends, two of the biggest entertainers in the business, but by the late 1990s, that friendship had turned into a bitter feud that played out in courtrooms, headlines, and personal attacks. It all started in Branson, Missouri, where the two shared a theater. What should have been a successful partnership quickly collapsed, leading to lawsuits worth $35 million and nearly 2 decades of silence between them. The trouble began in December 1998 at the Talk of the Town Theater. Newton's company held the lease, which gave him control over the building. That's when he made his move. On December 4th, he locked Orlando out, claiming he was owed over $2 million. Orlando denied it, but it didn't matter. He had just been kicked out of his own theater by a man he once considered a friend. Orlando didn't let it go. In April 1999, he filed a lawsuit for $15 million, accusing Newton of secretly recording him, conspiring against him, and forcing him out to rename the venue the Wayne Newton Theater. Newton fired back in June with his own $20 million lawsuit, saying Orlando wasn't paying his share of expenses and couldn't draw the crowds he had promised. According to Newton, Orlando couldn't even fill half the seats in their 750-person theater. Things got ugly fast. Orlando accused Newton of holding his daughter's Christmas presents hostage during the lockout. Newton, in turn, accused Orlando of spreading lies to the press. 4 years, the lawsuits dragged on, turning what had once been a business deal into one of the nastiest feuds in show business. Neither spoke to the other for nearly 20 years. It wasn't until 2016, at a Las Vegas movie premiere, that Newton walked up to Orlando and extended a hand. After all those years, the two finally started to mend what had been broken. But this wasn't the only battle Tony Orlando faced. For most of his career, he struggled with how people saw his music. He had sold millions of records, yet critics dismissed him as a bubblegum pop artist, a label that suggested his music was simple, lightweight, and not to be taken seriously. In the 1970s, Tony Orlando and Dawn were one of the biggest acts around. Songs like Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree and Knock 3 Times were massive hits, but while fans loved them, rock critics saw them as disposable pop. The group's clean-cut image and their family-friendly variety show on CBS only reinforced that idea. Meanwhile, the music world was changing fast. Rock was getting louder, edgier, and more rebellious. Orlando's music didn't fit the mold. In 1975, Rolling Stone magazine called his songs vapid and saccharine. He tried to ignore the criticism, but it stuck with him. The pressure to maintain his image while wanting to be taken seriously as an artist became overwhelming. By 1977, it all came crashing down. He suffered a nervous breakdown and later admitted he had been struggling with cocaine addiction. In his 2002 memoir Halfway to Paradise, he revealed that the pressure of fame and the constant fight for respect nearly broke him. Even after his recovery, the bubblegum pop label never fully went away. He tried to break free by taking on new challenges, including a Broadway role in Barnum in 1981, but no matter what he did, critics still saw him as the guy who sang feel-good pop songs. In 1993, Tony Orlando made a decision that would shape the rest of his career. He opened the Yellow Ribbon Music Theater in Branson, Missouri, a 2,000-seat venue that quickly became one of the biggest attractions in town. At its peak, more than 500,000 people visited every year. But for Orlando, this theater wasn't just about music, it was about giving back, especially to the men and women who served in the military. Every November from 1993 to 2013, Orlando held a free Veterans Day homecoming celebration at the theater. Thousands of veterans came to Branson each year, turning the town into a gathering place for those who had served. The impact went beyond the stage. Local businesses saw a huge boost in sales during these events, and Branson became known as one of the most veteran-friendly cities in the country. In 2022, the town's mayor officially declared November 8th as Tony Orlando Yellow Ribbon Day, a tribute to everything he had done for the community. By the time Orlando retired from live performances in 2024, he had spent 31 years on stage in Branson, performing more than 9,000 shows and keeping his biggest hits alive for a whole new generation. But Orlando's story wasn't just about success. In 2002, he released Halfway to Paradise, a memoir that revealed the struggles he had faced behind the scenes. His career had taken off in the 1970s, but fame came with a price. He became addicted to cocaine, and by 1977, his life was spiraling out of control. The pressure of the music industry combined with his personal struggles led to a nervous breakdown. One night, at his lowest point, he stood on the ledge of a New York hotel room, ready to jump. Then the phone rang. It was his sister. That call saved his life. It was a wake-up moment that led him to turn away from addiction and find strength in his faith. His book also revealed the challenges of his upbringing. He was raised by a Puerto Rican father and a Greek mother, and while their cultures shaped him, he often struggled with his identity. He also opened up about one of his biggest career regrets, turning down the chance to record Sugar, Sugar, a song that later became a massive hit for the Archies in 1969. The memoir didn't hold back on tough topics. Orlando spoke about the painful breakup of Tony Orlando and Dawn, one of the biggest acts of the 1970s. Creative differences and personal conflicts led to the group's split in 1977. For the first time, he shared his side of the story. But the most heartbreaking part of the book was his account of losing his close friend, comedian Freddie Prinze. Orlando was one of the last people to see him before his tragic death. The grief was overwhelming, but it also deepened his belief that success and happiness don't always go hand in hand.